All right, computer chads, we're going to go into the future of time series forecasting. We're going to give the business user a Web3 experience so they can talk to the forecast in real time, a conversational AI, and the forecast in one web page. Because when a business user looks at your forecast, no matter how accurate it normally is with machine learning, deep learning, statistical learning, no matter how good the features and the data are, the user is going to make changes to the forecast. So we're going to allow them to do that in real time. This is the future of time series forecasting.
We got this new project on my GitHub, Agent Forecast, Agentic AI with time series forecasts in a React app. Here we got the project on GitHub. So it's a backend folder and a front end folder. So when you go in the backend, we see a data generator and a main file. Then we also have our models. In our models, we have the forecast agent and we have the forecast model. In our front end, we have the React app. We have the HTML front end. And then we have JSON configuration. So first, an overview of the project. The code is Python backend with a JavaScript front end and also, of course, HTML front end. And we have Docker files for the front end and a Docker file for the back end. So we're going to run in two terminals, the back end in one terminal and the front end in the other terminal. You can try this at home and follow with the video. You will need an Anthropic API key. So you'd go on the Anthropic website, make an account, do a key. You're probably going to need to buy $5 worth of tokens in order to have an API key. But that's how you get started here. And then we'll get a interface with a chatbot and the forecast. So we're predicting supply chain demand. We'll be able to tell the chatbot commands like increase this one item's purchase rate by 20% starting next week. We can tell them we're expecting a product shortage, so reduce demand for 2 weeks. And we could tell them all sorts of things like that. We can give them a specific day of the month because the bot is going to understand what day it is today when it's running. There is a Docker Compose file, but we'll just be using the Docker file for the back end and the Docker file for the front end. We're going to run the app. So on one side, we'll do the front end. And in the other command prompt, we'll do the back end. So first we'll get the back end started. We'll build the Docker image. And I do have Docker Engine running right now. So this should start up the back end. And next we're gonna run the back end. So if you do it yourself at home, this is what it's gonna look like. And so in here you put your key, and I'm gonna run this off camera because I have it set up in a way where you have to put the key into the command prompt, and I don't want to show you my key. So I'll be right back. I'm gonna get this running. We have it running, and now we're gonna run the front end. So first we'll build the Docker image for the front end. There we go. Now we'll run that beautiful front end. All right, so it's available on this server. We can open it up in our browser. There we have it. This is the app. And of course, this is a foundational project. So you probably would not, I mean, you could, if you might potentially deploy something just looking like this, but there's a lot you can do with this. This is really just getting a skeleton for what you could do. So here we see the supply chain forecast. We have steel, wood, glass, historicals. So this chart's showing us 2025 April to today, which is mid-June. And then the future mid-June, it forecasts into the future. And so you could put your mouse up here and it'll show you exactly what that value is that you're pointing at. And on the left, of course, we have the AI chatbot. So let's try doing what it suggests. Increase steel by 20% next week. So right now it's June 17 and it's predicting June 25. There's going to be a spike. Right now it's thinking that next week is 7 whole days from now. That's the start of next week. We could tune it a little bit so that next week is automatically the following Monday, for example. But for now, this is cool. Now let's tell it something else. So the other suggestion that we have is we expect lower wood demand for 10 days. Let's tell it that. All right, interesting output. So lower wood demand for 10 days. It made the wood demand 0. So it thinks that starting the next day, demand is going to be 0 for the next 10 days. That's a very aggressive drop, obviously. So we could tell it things. We can give it more context in the prompt engineering or there's possibly other ways, but what I'm thinking is we can go into the prompt engineering and fix these things. I think I'm going to do more videos about this. Right now, I just want to give an overview of how this works currently. We can also tell it other stuff. We can tell it in 4 days, there will be a permanent increase in glass demand for as long as we can tell. So there, in 4 days, we see glass goes up. And, I didn't even give it any statistical context at all. So that's kind of silly. But we see that it still did something. It just guessed what the increase was. So maybe a way that we can make this better is having the chatbot clarify things before making changes. That would be another good improvement we could make. Let's try another thing here. How about starting in 2 weeks, we're going to need more steel by a 30% increase. There, and so when the steel demand changes in the future now, we see from 97 to 127. So that is the ballpark of a 30% increase. So that's looking good. And of course, this forecast is already a simplified example because when we look at the past data samples, clearly the future forecast does not look that similar to the past trends. And, we're using an RNN. We're using a recurrent neural network, and it's a very basic RNN too. We could use ARIMA. We could use statistical methods. I've used a custom XGBoost model for forecasting as well. There's all sorts of ways we can forecast this. So don't really be concerned too much about how silly the forecast looks right now compared to the past. But if you've worked in forecasting programming, you know that people who use the forecast, they have all the sorts of context that doesn't go into the model that they have to apply to the forecast they get from the model. So this is an exercise in allowing the user to edit a forecast. And, really something beautiful that could come from this is the people in charge of delivering demand forecasts, they can get the initial forecast from a model and they could make the changes with the chatbot while seeing the chart change. And then those changes, because they're going into a chart, there's clearly a database here underneath the chart. And so we could actually have someone edit the forecast by chatbot. And then, we could have maybe something we could add here is a second part underneath the chart. There can be the data table itself, kind of like a spreadsheet table. And then the user could manually edit the spreadsheet while also being able to talk to the chatbot, also being able to look at the forecast chart. So we could totally transform the way that business forecasting happens. A lot of people are in spreadsheets doing these things, and they really don't have visuals to go along with the spreadsheet work they do. There's a lot of companies that have analysts and other people, planners, who do this work in spreadsheets, and it's like you're staring at walls of numbers. So this would be a beautiful transformation. It could probably help those people have a higher enjoyment of their job, for one thing. It could probably help them, do a better job too, because they'd have better equipment with which to do their work. But also, of course, right now, this is a mid result because this is not the end game here for sure. Let's move now into the code. All right, computer chads, let's get into this. We're generating the historical data. This is the first part we're going to look at in the code. Just to get a quick idea of what the data looks like, we saw in the forecast, we have steel, wood, glass, and we have some just simple things to create trends and patterns so that the forecast is interesting. Put some randomness in there. Let's move into the forecast. So the forecast model is a simple RNN, recurrent neural network. So we're using our generated data to train the model. And we could get more into it, but this model is, for now, it's just a toy model. It doesn't really matter that much. Just a cool RNN working with a neural network, having fun with deep learning. This is the forecast agent. We're using Anthropic Claude. As we see down below, we have Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is the exact LLM model that we're using. And just in the middle here, we have the prompt, which takes into account the message the user sent, as well as today's date. This currently does not use continuity in the conversation. It only really accounts for the latest message the user has said. It doesn't remember previous messages, but we could add that in if we wanted to. To show how the forecast model connects with the agent, we're back at the forecast RNN. So if we scroll down with the functions, we have the apply adjustments function. So in the adjustment for the forecast, we're looking at different objects in the adjustment, including the material that's getting adjusted and the dates for the adjustment. We can look at this function. We can follow it into the main file. So this is the file that glues the backend together. So the logic for the app accounts for adjustments. So if there are adjustments, it applies them using the model's apply adjustments method. And then it sends responses from the updated forecast to the app. So it's using WebSocket to send the responses, and we'll see WebSocket in the app. This is the React app. So we're looking at JavaScript code, and we're connecting to the WebSocket so that the back end is tied to the front end. And what happens is, in order to update the chart, we get a WebSocket message sent to the React app that updates the chart. And here we have our chart update where we get rid of the existing chart, and then we have the data for the new chart, and then we create the chart. And of course, the chart has our 3 data variables: steel, wood, and glass. And towards the bottom of our code for the React app, we have the chat panel. So this is where the user talks to the conversational AI. And in our chatbot, we have the header, we have the messages, and the chat input for the user to send messages to the AI.
Awesome, right? This is just the beginning. You can do so many things that are cooler than what this was, right? This is the foundation. Let's get out there and let's create awesome stuff that helps people. Have a good day.